It wasn't just a bank, it wasn't just a park. It was a place marked by time, by a promise, and by a wait that seemed impossible. Every day, at the same time, a lonely man sat there. While the world around him changed, he remained still. The children who used to run have now grown up. The trees, which were small, now form immense shadows. But he remained in the same place. People passed by, watched, and wondered, why does he still come here? Who is he waiting for? Some laughed, but no one knew the truth. It was as if that bank held a secret that has crossed generations, a silence that carried hope and pain. What could keep someone stuck in the same place for 40 years? Would it be crazy? Would it be a promise? Or would it be love? And this is where the story begins. It was an ordinary city park, but those who keep the smell of freshly cut grass and the constant sound of birds mixed with the laughter of children. A living, pulsating space seemed to slow down for those who passed by. Families gathered on Sundays for impromptu picnics. Children ran after colorful balls that got lost among the trees. Couples walked hand in hand, exchanging knowing glances, writing their own love stories with every step. But in the midst of this happy and noisy scene, there was a figure that stood out, a silent man, always in the same place, always on the same wooden bench, a bench that already bore the marks of time. Just like him, it was impossible not to notice. Their clothes were simple, discreet, almost invisible. A sun-worn hat hid some of his already whitening hair. He didn't seem to be part of the hustle and bustle of the park. I was there, but it was as if I lived in another reality, trapped in a different time. Every day, at the same time, he appeared. He sat on the bench as if performing a sacred ritual, and it stayed, hours and hours, always alone, always looking at the entrance gate. Anyone who passed by couldn't but be curious. Some approached, discreetly trying to understand. Others just watched from afar, intrigued. The neighbors created their own versions. It's just custom, some said. There's nothing else to do, whispered others. Perhaps he is waiting for someone who will never come, the more skeptical ventured. And little by little, the man on the bench became part of the landscape, a silent, almost mystical presence, carrying an unanswered enigma. The children grew up learning that he would always be there. The trees changed with the seasons, but he didn't. The park was renovated, painted, and gained new flowers. And yet, nothing seemed to keep him away from that bench. But the truth nobody knew. There was something in that fixed gaze, and that almost impossible patience, that betrayed he wasn't there by chance. It wasn't a mania. It wasn't madness. It was a weight, and not just any weight. It was a weight of decades. 40 years old? Imagine 40 years. Things can change in so much time. How many loves are born and die? How many stories begin and end? How many lives are transformed? And yet he remained. Property. Loyal to a promise that no one could explain. People wondered silently, who was he waiting for? Why did you never give up? Does this person still exist? But he didn't answer. Never. When someone dared to ask a question, he would just smile discreetly, like someone keeping a secret too big to reveal. And that was just wood worn by time. To him was much more. It was an altar, an invisible meeting point, a piece of ground where time has stopped. And with each new sunset, while everyone else left, he remained. as if he believed that, at some point between so many comings and goings, the park gate would reveal the face he was waiting for. And this is where the mystery arises. Because what could keep someone stuck in the same place for 40 years? What could fuel such patience in the face of so many disappointments? Would it be crazy? Would it be a promise? Or would it be love? You who are listening now might be wondering, would I be able to wait that long for someone? Would I have the strength to face loneliness, doubt, and the laughter of others just by believing in a promise? This man had. This man believed. And while everyone else went on with their lives, while the world around them kept changing, he remained faithful. Because for him, that wait was not a waste of time. It was life, it was purpose, it was hope. And so the mystery grows. Because if he's still there after so much time, it's because he believes that one day, someone will walk through that gate. And it is precisely here that the story begins to reveal itself. A secret kept for 40 years, a promise that was never forgotten, and a love that defied time itself. Pause. Soft music swells slightly. He had been waiting on the same park bench for 40 years for her. And most importantly, will it ever come back? Why did 40 years ago, that bank was not just a bank. It wasn't just wood and iron, worn down by sun and rain. It was a meeting point. It was the place where two hearts had sworn that time would not be able to separate them. On that same bench, under the trees that now bend with the weight of the decades, he had promised to meet the great love of his life again. He was young, full of dreams, and believed that destiny smiled on those who had the courage to love. She believed it too. But life, cruel as it sometimes can be, suddenly interrupted that story. She left in a hurry, driven by circumstances he could never fully understand. There were no long explanations, no proper goodbyes. Just a few quick words, choked with tears. Wait for me. On the park bench, one day I'll be back. And he believed. Maybe because I wanted to believe. Perhaps because to a passionate heart, every promise sounds like eternal truth. In the early years, it was almost palpable. Every day he returned to the bench, as if preparing for a certain reunion. She straightened her coat, took care of her hair, and brought fresh flowers that she bought from the same stall on the corner. Every face that appeared at the gate made his heart race. And with each misstep, each stranger who wasn't her, he took a deep breath and said to himself, Tomorrow, maybe it's tomorrow. But the days turned into months, the months turned into years, and the years dragged on until they became decades. And every year, the bench aged along with him. The wood no longer had the shine it once had, the iron creaked in the wind, and his youth was also slowly fading away. In the face of an unforgiving time, the neighborhood began to notice. People, always so quick to judge, commented on his persistence as if it were a mystery impossible to decipher. Is he still there? They asked each other. Every day, at the same time? Yes, every. The young people passing by laughed, thinking it was madness, senseless stubbornness. Some even mocked, throwing mocking looks, but none of that shook him. He remained firm, sitting, looking at the entrance gate with the same hope as always, because for him, a promise was worth more than a lifetime of doubts. And even when the silence seemed to tell him that he might never see her again, he clung to the words she had left. Wait for me. Little by little, the bank became part of his. Identity. It was as if it was engraved into his skin. It didn't matter the cold of winter, the heat of summer, the unexpected rain. He always came back. And everyone knew that if they wanted to find him, they just had to go to the park. Some people secretly admired him. There were those who saw it as a symbol of loyalty, of true love. Others, more cynical, muttered, "What a waste of life." But no one knew the weight of that weight. No one knew how much he had already cried in silence, had thought about giving up, and yet he didn't give up. Time has not been kind. Wrinkles appeared, legs lost their firmness, eyes no longer saw as they used to. But the flame within him never went out. It was small, fragile, sometimes almost imperceptible, but it still burned, and there was something else, something only he knew. Because every time he thought about leaving that bench, every time he almost gave in to tiredness and hopelessness, he remembered her smile, the way she held his hand, the promise whispered in the midst of her haste, "Wait for me." These 3 words echoed like a mantra in his mind, and they were enough to keep him alive. Now 40 years have passed, 40 years of flowers that withered without being delivered. 40 years of seasons followed one another, changing the surrounding scenery, but not its purpose. 40 years of unanswered questions, and yet it remains there, firm, silent, motionless in the face of time, as if his entire life were summed up in this act of waiting. And you, who are listening to this story now, might be asking yourself, would I do the same? Would you be able to wait 40 years for someone? Maybe you say no. Maybe you think that no one deserves so much sacrifice. Or maybe deep down, you feel that this kind of fidelity is too rare to ignore, because deep down we all carry a promise. We all have someone somewhere in our lives for whom we would be able to wait. And that's where the question hangs, bringing the suspense that doesn't let us take our eyes off it. Did she keep her promise? Could it be that after 40 years he has crossed the park gate again? Or did fate have other plans for him and for her? He had been waiting on the same park bench for 40 years for her. And the answer to this mystery is what you will discover now. After 40 years of waiting, time had already left deep marks on him. The body no longer had the same strength, nor the same vigor that once sustained so many dreams. His legs trembled at the slightest exertion, his chest heaved during short walks, and his eyes, previously so intent on the park gate, now blinked more slowly, as if his vision too was tired of searching in vain. And for the first time in his entire life, doubt overtook him. For years he had clung to the promise like a man clinging to a plank in the middle of a raging ocean. It was the promise that kept him alive, that gave meaning to his mornings and filled the long silences of his nights. But now, sitting on the same bench that already creaked with the weight of time, a question tormented him silently, gnawing at every part of his soul. What if she never comes again? These words were not just a passing thought. They were an open wound which hurt every time the clock completed another cycle without an answer. They were like a constant shadow, whispering in his ears that maybe it had all been for nothing. The tears fell discreetly, almost embarrassed, as if he still didn't have the right to weaken after so long. But to the eyes of those who watched from the outside, he was no longer the young man full of faith who believed that tomorrow would always bring good news. He was a tired man, A man who had given his entire life to a wooden bench and a promise that might never be fulfilled. Maybe it was time to give up. Maybe it was time to admit that life had run its course, that the years had passed, that she would never return. And deep down, there was a pain even greater than her absence. The fear of having believed in something that never really existed. The fear of having dedicated an entire life to a ghost. He remembered the flowers he no longer carried. In the early years, they were red, vibrant, full of perfume. Then came the simple flowers, bought in a hurry. And finally, the days came when there was no more strength to carry them. The hat he had previously adjusted with vanity was now worn, faded by the sun. The coat, which he always wore carefully in the hope of finding her presentable again, already had patches on it, and he no longer recognized himself. But still, there was something that prevented him from getting up from there forever. An invisible thread, thin but strong, that still tied him to that promise. Because despite all the pain, despite the weight of 40 years, hope never completely abandoned him. It was like a small, almost extinguished flame, still flickering in the darkness. And it was this flame that made him look at the gate every day, even when I knew that probably no one would come. The neighborhood, now quieter in the face of his persistence, no longer mocked so much. Some were even moved to see him there, so fragile, yet so firm in his waiting. Others whispered that it was time to leave him alone, that perhaps he needed help, but no one dared touch that sacred routine. It was as if everyone knew that that bench was not just a seat. It was the altar of a love that no one else understood. And you who are listening to this story now might be asking yourself, is it worth waiting so long? Would I have the strength to persist when everything seemed lost? Didn't he realize that life flashed before his eyes? But there's something you need to understand. For him, life only made sense in that wait. For him, giving up wasn't just abandoning the bank, it was abandoning himself. It was like tearing out the pages of an entire existence. That day, however, the weight of time seemed greater than ever. The sun no longer warmed as before. The wind brought him more cold than relief. And every minute I sat there felt like a relentless judgment. You waited. And she didn't come back. He lowered his head. The eyes filled with silent tears, and for the first time her heart almost gave out, almost gave up. Maybe it was time to get up. Maybe it was time to leave the bank behind, to accept that the promise would not be kept, that she would never come back. Would fate allow this? Would life let him go, just at the moment when his faith was almost gone? Pause. Soft music begins to swell, because sometimes it's the moment we're about to give up that something unexpected happens. It was then, on a golden autumn afternoon, that something happened. The sky was painted in orange tones, and the wind played with the dry leaves that fell from the trees and swirled across the ground. The park was different that day, or maybe it was. Tired, fragile, almost defeated inside, he felt that his strength was no longer the same. Every sigh felt heavy, every memory distant. As the leaves fell, he closed his eyes for a moment. He let the wind blow across his wrinkled face, bringing the smell of wet earth and the distant sound of children still playing. In that brief silence, his tired memory revived old images. Her smile, the warmth of her hand, the promise whispered urgently before their farewell. Wait for me on the park bench. One day I'll be back, And then when he opened his eyes again, the impossible began to take shape. There, at the park gate, a silhouette appeared. First it wanders, blurred by the distance and the low afternoon sun. He blinked his eyes, trying to make sure it wasn't just another illusion of his tired mind. How many times have I believed I saw something? How many times has your heart raced for no reason, only to be crushed by reality? But this time, there was something different. The figure walked slowly, with steps that carried the weight of years. His body was no longer the same. His hair was now white as the snow he remembered from winters past. And yet, there was something impossible to hide. The eyes, the eyes. They shone with the same intensity as decades ago. The same light that had illuminated his youth. The same flame that made him hope when all seemed lost. He didn't need words. No explanations were needed. He recognized her immediately. It was her, the park, that changed everything around. Grew up himself. But one thing remained intact: love. For a moment he thought his heart couldn't take it. The tears, which had so often fallen in silence from sadness, now welled up in abundance from surprise and emotion. His hands were shaking, no longer from the fatigue of age, but from the anticipation of finally touching what he had waited for so long. And as if time had decided to stop, the two looked at each other from afar. It was as if 40 years had dissolved in seconds. There were no more questions, no more explanations. There was only that moment. The path between the gate and the bank seemed eternal. Her every step was slow, but loaded with meaning. Each step he took while still seated was as if it were taken inside his heart, accelerated, anxious, incredulous. People around began to notice. Some stopped discreetly, trying to understand what was happening. Others simply felt they were witnessing something rare, almost sacred. Reunion that didn't need words to be understood. And you who are following this story now might be asking yourself, how is that possible? What took her so long? What happened in those 40 years of absence? These questions still hang in the air. And in a way, it is this mystery that maintains the charm of the moment. Because when faced with the reunion, the past no longer matters so much. What matters is that she's back. She kept her promise, and he knew that all the waiting had been worth it. But there was something even stronger going on there. The bench, a silent witness to so many years of solitude, now became the stage for a love story that defied time. It was as if every crack in the wood, every stain on the iron, every fallen leaf around was proof that fidelity and hope still exist. And the audience, with their curious eyes, knew they were looking at something they don't see every day. A love that withstood everything. A love that returned. He tried to get up. The legs were shaking, the body didn't want to obey. But his heart pushed his soul forward, begging him not to waste even a second of that moment. When she finally rose unsteadily, she smiled. And in that smile, he recognized not only the woman who had left, but also the promise that had always kept him alive. They didn't need to say anything. The eyes spoke for themselves. And what they said was simple. Time has passed. But we are still here, and that's what matters. Time had changed. Everything except love. But would this reunion be enough to heal the wounds of 40 years? Would the answers he had been waiting to hear finally come? Or could it be that, like so many stories in life, some questions will never have an explanation? Pause, Soft music builds in emotion, because sometimes destiny doesn't give us all the answers. Sometimes he gives us just the essentials, the chance to meet again. And for them, maybe that was enough. The park bench was not just wood and iron. It wasn't just a time-worn seat marked by cracks and rust. It was a silent altar where hope was renewed with each sunrise, an invisible testimony of fidelity, patience, and eternal love. For 40 years, that bench held the tears that fell discreetly. He heard the sighs of pain, the silently murmured prayers, the dreams that were almost extinguished. He was a companion in solitude, a confidant of a heart that never gave up, and the guardian of a promise that many considered impossible. But in everything took on new meaning. The decades of waiting stopped being a burden and became living proof that when two souls are connected by something greater than time, nothing can separate them. In that moment, after 40 years, they understood a truth that few have the courage to accept. Sometimes waiting is not wasting time. Sometimes waiting is the purest way to keep alive the promise that gives meaning to life. Her smile brought back the youth that time had stolen. His gaze gave her back the certainty that she had never been forgotten. And together, without needing explanations or long words, they knew it had all been worth it. He understood that true love knows no clocks or calendars, because when two souls are destined, time is just a detail. The park, a silent witness to this story, seemed to breathe differently that day. The trees that had seen them young and accompanied them through the seasons now bowed as if greeting their reunion. The leaves dancing in, the wind seemed to celebrate. Even the curious looks of those who witnessed the scene turned into discreet tears, as if everyone knew they were before something rare, precious, almost sacred. It wasn't just a reunion between two people. It was the victory of love over time, the victory of faith over doubt, the victory of a heart that never stopped believing. And perhaps that is the great message of this story, because deep down we all carry promises in our hearts, some made to other people, some made to ourselves. And often life presents us with a choice: give up or keep waiting. He waited, and your wait was not in vain. And you? For whom or what would you be willing to wait? What promise in your life is so strong that not even time could erase it? Commenting app for engagement. Now I want to know from you, do you believe that true love can withstand the test of time? What was the most memorable promise you ever made or received in your life? Would you have the courage to wait for a person or a dream for decades, like he did? Write your answer in the comments. Your opinion may inspire and move others watching as well.